Southern Illinois, Old Earth, Old Forests, Old Testament. This ground holds tales of many ancient civilizations, historic events, and fantastic folklore. The portion of the state that identifies itself as Little Egypt is surrounded by the Mississippi, Ohio, and Wabash rivers. The rivers not only define its boundaries, but have shaped the histories and lives of all those who have lived there. These waters encapsulate a land hundreds of miles, attitudes, and lifestyle away from the cosmopolitan cities to the north. This countryside has challenged all those who have staked their claim here, leaving behind a place filled with fading stories, histories, and lessons from the past. This is the story of Elizabeth Reed, who in 1845 became the first woman to be hanged in Illinois. She was accused of poisoning her husband Leonard with arsenic-laced tea, then tried and convicted by a jury of 12 men. Betsy was hanged on May 23rd, which to most would be where the story ends. However, Elizabeth Reed's story had just begun. The circumstances of her arrest, trial, conviction, execution, burial, and afterlife have been debated ever since. The folklore that exists today suggests her restless spirit wanders the countryside. Does her ghost haunt the site of her execution because she was falsely accused, or due to the very nature of her crime? Some may argue it was because her voice was never heard. While these ghostly debates may never end, what is known is that this murderous witch's story fascinates to this day. The Reeds lived and sharecropped on farmland in Heathville, Illinois. This nondescript parcel of land lies off an ordinary curve next to Highway 33. The doomed pair never made a decent living, leaving Elizabeth in debt when her husband Leonard passed away.
One of the things about Southern Illinois is the multitude of names that have ominous overtones. In the Crawford County area, there's Purgatory Swamp, which, of course, purgatory implies you're wandering in the afterlife. The Devil's Neck along the river, Devil's Backbone is the name of the ridge. Where those names come from, I'm not exactly sure, but they all imply this ominous vibe, and the area actually gives that off in strange ways. Not that I'm a psychic or have that ability, but the air, it just picks up on those names and it permeates everything around it. That interests me a lot about Southern Illinois, and that feeling's still there even when you're not looking for it.
Well, Heathville is the closest town, and nowadays it's about 6 houses, but it was a little bigger than that in the early 1800s, and the center of the community was the Heath Inn, which was, besides being an inn, it was a stagecoach stop, and the mail went there, so everyone gathered there, and it would have been about a half a mile from the Reed cabin. And the lady that worked for our family's name was Orma Baker, and her mother's side of the family were the Heaths, and so they knew the Reeds. And then Leonard Reed is buried in the Baker Cemetery, which sits behind her property.
The Betsy Reed story as we know it goes like this. Elizabeth Betsy Reed was convicted and found guilty of poisoning her husband with arsenic-laced sassafras tea. On April 26, 1845, she was actually convicted, or they started the trial. And then on April 28th of 1845, that's when she was convicted and found guilty.
Elizabeth Reed's story seemed destined to exist between generational gossip and cemetery tales until attracting the attention of the Lawrence County Historical Society. Through countless hours of research led by Society Treasurer John King, the Society compiled the official record, including newspaper accounts from as far away as London, England. The local Arts Council staged the play Hanging, the saga of Betsy Reed, which Dan Norton wrote based on the Historical Society's meritorious research.
There was nothing in the records that explained how they knew for sure this was arsenic.
The only reason to suspect arsenic poisoning was that Evelyn Deal said that she found this particular piece of paper between two plates in the cupboard, and then Mrs. Reed threw it outdoors. She retrieved it, and that traced back to Dr. Logan at his pharmacy in Russellville, saying it had to be me that had to be bought at my store. I don't remember selling it to anybody, but only I would have packaged it in this way, in this sort of paper.
So some of the accusations, the reason why they accused her of it, was there was, I assume, a salesman in a general store that swears he sold her the arsenic, and the only witness that actually saw her put the powder in his tea was, I believe, a niece or a younger daughter. That was who testified, and that testimony was enough. You know, she was a woman back then. They really didn't have rights. That was good enough.
Among the claims against the Reed estate following Betsy's trial were that from Doctors Boyle, Wynn, and Logan, who had separately been treating Leonard for a persistent stomach ailment over a 3-year period. The claims were for unpaid medical bills, including doctor's visits and antimony treatments, which were used to purge inflamed bowels. The treatments should beckon the question as to whether the white powder seen by Evelyn Deal was prescribed by one of Leonard's physicians.
Then the Harrimans, who she reported seeing the poison to, Mrs. Harriman's father was the constable, which was Dwayne Gaines. And if you could see this area, it's all within about a 2-mile radius. And so they got her father, who was the constable, and they told him that they thought Leonard had been poisoned. And the doctors came when he had died, because he became very ill suddenly. But he had been having chronic stomach illness. So they suspected that he was being slowly poisoned, and then Betsy got a little excited or in a hurry and gave him a bigger dose that day that killed him. And I think that's what his autopsy led them to believe. She told me that her grandfather, or might have been great-grandfather, I can't remember at the time right now what she said, but he was a 10-year-old boy about the time of the murders, and he knew them, that they would come down to do their trading at the store that was down there and stop in and get their mail. And that Betsy was very odd. She wasn't liked. That she wore a white bonnet. She never mentioned a veil, which has been mentioned in some of our research. And Rip Kelsheimer's book says it was a veil. It's a historical novel, but in our research, that's why he said a veil. But I was told a white bonnet, and when she would go out of doors, she would put a black bonnet on top of that, and that was odd, is what the neighbors said.
Downtown Palestine has all the comforts one comes to expect from a Southern Illinois community. This historic downtown area is loaded with charm, but visitors are most likely never aware of the circumstances that befell this small town in 1845.
And then they brought her to Palestine, which was at the time the county seat. She was held in the jail at Palestine, and this is where the whole witch story comes in with Betsy Reed, but some people claim she was a witch because while she was being held at the Palestine jail, she actually burnt the jail down with no source of ignition, no matches, no way of actually burning the jail down. And she somehow managed to set fire to that jail. So that's still a mystery and a legend to this day, how Betsy actually burnt the jail down.
But anyway, when he had died, it was obvious he'd been poisoned. And she was arrested because you got to remember at that time, Palestine, was the county seat. There's a land office up here on the square. Well, the high school was the town square. Land office on the south end, the jail was on the north end. So she was arrested and brought to jail. And this jail was a formidable structure. I mean, it was recessed into the ground a couple feet. It had 12 by 12 timbers, 12 inch by 12 inch on the inside and outside. And then 12-inch gap between them that vertical boards were just stuck in. There wasn't a door entering the jail. At first you had to go up a ladder to the second story. A 2-foot by 2-foot trap door would be lifted up and you would go down into it. And later on, they actually put a stairway up to the second story. And there was 2 windows. I don't recall their size, but they had 1-inch iron bars, I believe, about 3 inches apart. So it was pretty well escape-proof. Somehow, she had got hold of matches or a lighting device anyway. And you got to figure if that jail went up in around 1821 or 1820, by 1844 the timbers would have been pretty well dried out. So it may have got started fairly easy.
Betsy was held in the Palestine jail, and somehow they never knew how she did it, but she managed to burn the wall in the jail a little bit at a time until one night the fire got away from her. And when the fire got away from her, she burned the jail down, and she was running down Main Street in Palestine. The jail set where what is now the high school sits in Palestine, and there was a hotel where the Fife Opera House sits, and a gentleman was sitting outside, and his last name was Gerard, and he saw her running down the street, and I think her clothes were smoking, and he tackled her and saved her. And I know one thing that Orma Baker told me was that helped lead to the rumors that she was a witch, because they didn't know how she started that fire.
One interesting story that we were told is that of the belief that a secret, select few practiced the craft of creating fire from thin air, and that Elizabeth Reed was gifted with this ability. It is a hypothetical explanation as to how she was able to set her formidable confines ablaze with no known source to do so. Whether or not one believes in this is not important, but it certainly adds to the belief in witchcraft that the people of the time accused Betsy of. It is interesting to note that the jail fire was Betsy's only documented attempt at any type of defense or desire to escape her fate. Unfortunately for Mrs. Reed, the failed plot was further proof of her guilt in the eyes of the community. One thing is for certain: the townsfolk were relieved when she was finally removed from Palestine.
And the jail was pretty much destroyed, so they had to move Betsy to Lawrenceville. And when they moved her to Lawrenceville, that's where she was tried.
From what I read, hangings were kind of a big event back then, and people would actually come in and set up like a festival, like they would sell and trade and barter. And the people got mad because when they moved her, everyone was supposedly set up, had shops set up to sell things. And when they moved her to Lawrenceville, which is 20 some miles from here, that's a long trip by a horse-drawn cart or something like that. So everyone had to move down there for the hanging. And supposedly when they got there, I think the estimate was 20,000 people. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but a rather large crowd.
When I started writing the play, I had just kind of assumed that Betsy Reed was probably guilty. She was probably from a hard life and things just happened. But Donna Burton from the Society had pointed out this antimony. So for me, the big surprise was that The man is taking antimony. And she said, you look up antimony. So I looked this up, and of course, you find out that antimony poisoning mimics arsenic poisoning, so very much so his symptoms could have been caused by this antimony. The next big surprise for me was that he was sick for 3 years, but then all of a sudden, in 1844, they think it's arsenic poisoning. Nobody thought this for the 2.5 years prior to his death.
One of the aspects I appreciate about this story is the fact that she left no record of a defense. Her attorneys apparently didn't put her on the stand. There are no public statements with her defending herself. She could have very easily said, my husband has been ill with stomach problems for 3 or 4 years, which gives credence to the idea that she didn't kill him. Ghosts hang around places for a lot of different reasons. In her case, even though I believe she was guilty and committed the crime, maybe she didn't, and her ghost still wanders the cemetery because she's accused of a crime she didn't commit.
In the 1840s, I don't think they would have questioned the guilt of a woman. I mean, she was a woman. Everybody could see it was a possibility, and they just moved on with their lives.
Well, and remember, she had had the jail at Palestine on fire, whether you commit suicide or whether it's just an accidental get caught on fire. So they were considering her a witch and a bad lady.
We are in Lawrence County, Illinois, at the location where Elizabeth Betsy Reed was taken to be hung. Behind me here is the old football field, and this is the location where they brought her. The judge said to take her to a place within 1 mile of the courthouse, to a convenient place, which ended up being the location where this football field's now located at. So the crazy thing about all this, and still a mystery, is there's no historical marker at this location whatsoever indicating that she was hung out here. So if you just come out here and look, it's just an abandoned football field that's grown up now, and it's creepy. So it's still a big mystery as to the exact location of where the scaffold and she was actually placed to be hung. It says that there was people that watched this event from a hill, and that she was down at the bottom of the hill. So the location over here definitely fits the description, and all the scholars definitely say this is the location where it was at. We just don't have an exact, spot with a marker saying, this is where Elizabeth Betsy Reed was hung. So it's just weird. Historical records actually show that the county just doubled in size, during her hanging, like Dickerson said. People came in from all over the place to watch that. And backing the story up just a little bit, but before she was actually hung, as she was being brought out to her execution site, she was actually put on her own coffin. She was in a white dress, and she was on her own coffin, and she got religion. She became very religious when she found out, she was going to get executed. So there was a guy that actually baptized her in the river near where the new bridge is located at now in Lawrenceville. So she got baptized, and found religion. She was actually singing gospel songs as she was going to her own grave, singing. They said she was singing, all kinds of songs on the way there. So that's kind of a weird and eerie sight, I'm sure, too, seeing somebody sing as they go to their grave. But Yeah, there's a lot of reports, with the haunting too. People seeing that. That's what they see. They see the residual activity and the residual occurrence of that event taking place. So,
John Seed was a Baptist preacher who did a sermon, who was her minister at the time. Once he gets there, and Betsy rides down the hill to the side of the hanging, riding on her coffin on this robe, and she's singing hymns on the way down there. And this John Seed, he's from Scotland, and he's a firebrand, hell and brimstone preacher. He sees whatever this crowd is, 20,000 people, and he said he's going to deliver a sermon. So he preaches for over an hour, and it's hot sun. Betsy Reed is sitting on her coffin yelling hallelujah and amen all the way through the sermon. And then she gets up. Sheriff Samuel Thorne puts a bag over her head, a black bag, and then chops the rope. She hangs, and they let her hang for about a half hour, and then they put her down into that shallow open grave there underneath the gallows.
Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
There's a hill that the high school sits on now, and I guess a lot of people were sitting on it watching, but some people decided to climb up in a tree and sit on a branch. Well, after they announced the conviction, this, that, and the other, right as they were getting ready to throw the lever to hang her, the tree branch those people were sitting on broke. Well, when they fell, they all screamed, and it stated that the majority of the crowd heard the screams and turned to look to see what the commotion was about and missed the actual hanging.
Some of our night investigations that we've conducted out here, we've actually recorded strange cold spots in the area that seem to move, and they move through the football field area behind me here. We've heard what sounded like a scream at one point, but we can't confirm that it wasn't locals. We are in an urban area. We try to debunk everything, but we have heard mysterious sounds that they don't sound right. They don't sound like your typical noises you should be hearing out here. We've captured a couple EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, out here, but not as much as what we have at Baker Cemetery, which is where we've got a really good EVP that we captured. So, and we're going to be playing that, I think. So, but the EVP is extremely good. We captured at the cemetery, but out here it's mostly sounds. Just things you see out of the corner of your eye, but you're not sure it's there. We haven't got a whole lot of scientific evidence of stuff going on in the area, but we have physically seen and heard more things than what we've captured on our equipment. So it's definitely a location that I believe is haunted, especially some type of residual activity. Definitely, I believe, exists here due to the hanging that took place on May 23rd, 1845.
There's a lot of times people will talk to different spirits in a location in a different building, and they always think they're talking to Charlie or John or whoever they think the spirit's talking about. But I always look back and say, how do you know you're talking to that person? Because if I was a spirit in a location, you just want to talk to Susie, and I said, yeah, my name's Susie on by tripping an EMF detector or something like that, you really wouldn't know if that was Susie or not. You wouldn't know who it is, so it's hard to tell. The only way I think that you can actually really talk to spirits in a location is ask them questions that they may be the only one that knows the answer to that question.
The next mystery of the case involves the handling of Mrs. Reed's body following the hanging. A confusing account states that she was laid into a shallow grave next to the gallows, but newspaper articles of the time confirmed documents that reference results from her autopsy. Speculation is that it may have been a temporary resting spot to delay effects of the hot sun until the body could be properly examined, the necessity of which is debatable.
Well, first of all, a couple named Richards decided to put a newer tombstone at Baker Cemetery. I think they were trying to keep the history alive. I didn't speak to them about it. I don't know exactly what their thoughts were. And this one included Betsy's name. So people assume because the tombstone is there with her name on it that she's buried there. In all our research, we found a lot of different stories. And the one that she was buried under the scaffolding after the hanging, if it's true, she couldn't have been buried very long, because there was an article in the New York Times in 1845 that talked about her autopsy. And in the autopsy, they found that her stomach had pieces of brick and glass, where she tried to commit suicide like that to cheat the hangman. And so if they'd have buried her, I don't think they would have just dug her up. It didn't make any sense that she was buried underneath the scaffolding. The other things that I read that seemed the most feasible to me, and the research I did showed that this is what they did with a lot of murderers at the time, was they weren't to be buried on ground that had been blessed or hallowed ground, which the cemeteries were, since they had committed murder. So they usually buried them outside the gates or the fence instead of inside the cemetery. So from what I read, there's an interest at the old Lawrenceville cemetery, and that she was buried outside the gate, and there was some kind of depression you could see there for years, and that supposedly was where Betsy was buried.
Some people, they still argue to this day what happened after she was hung, and this is where the real mystery comes in. Because it doesn't matter who you talk to, everybody's got a different opinion on this. There's some historical accounts that state, she was hung right there on the old, where the old football field's at, right underneath the gallows. And the historical records show in some of the records that the doctors, and there was a group of medical students that dug up her body and used it, for examination, used it for medical purposes back in the day. That's one story. Another story is the family actually dug up Elizabeth Reed and brought her to where we are currently standing today, which is Baker Cemetery. And that's the whole mystery behind this thing too. Is she actually buried here? There's people that claim she's not. There's hardcore skeptics that say she is not buried in this cemetery.
Okay, I lived in this area for about 40 years. About a mile and a half up the road here. I was on the cemetery board for about 8 years back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And our duties were to repair stones and trim brush. And this guy had this dowsing rod that he used to find graves. And when he located the grave, we would try to see if there was a missing stone. And he went over to Betsy's grave just for the heck of it, and he found actually 2 graves there. And we were poking around trying to find maybe another stone, and I found that stone that's got ER on it, and I dug it up, reburied it because I didn't want somebody to come home and steal it. But since then, somebody has placed it in concrete, not exactly in the place that I found it, but somebody has placed it in concrete.
some of the paranormal activity and claims that we have heard about and even experienced ourselves in the cemetery. People have reported seeing Elizabeth Reed walk around in here in a white dress. And if you look at the historical accounts, that's what they say, she was buried in, because she was hung in her white dress. She rode to her execution site on top of the coffin in a white dress. So people have reported seeing Elizabeth Reed walking around here at all hours of the night, and even daytime reports of, a lady in a white dress here. So that's one of the ghost stories, behind this cemetery, that she still walks, the cemetery grounds. And people have also reported seeing her go up and down the lane of the cemetery. So that's one of the cool ghost stories, behind this place. And it's got to have some type of, evidence behind, some type of real thing going on, because there's been so many people report this event that, we can't really discount it as people's imaginations, because there's been so many people see and experience that.
People actually told me that they see something white move out of the corner of their eye, and they'll turn to look, and it's not there. It's never a defined shape, a dress, or anything. It's just a white blur, and multiple people have told stories that didn't associate with each other. They just came to me and said, hey, I was there, and this is what I experienced. So it's weird when more than one person tells you a story that when they weren't together when it happened.
We have some records that state that she was buried underneath the gallows when the doctors did the autopsy. But if she was buried there, she wasn't buried there to stay there. Then there was the idea that she was going to be buried in the city cemetery. The upstanding ladies of the town were not about to have this bloodthirsty tigress buried in their cemetery. And so in the play, I had some upstanding women of the community stop them from burying her in the cemetery. And those women repeated some of the items that were supposedly given in her confession that was to be published. And they also gave some other items that I found in newspaper reports. But then we believe that her body was removed. If she was buried in the city cemetery, it was removed and then buried in Crawford County or close to that line by some relatives of the family.
I believe that her body was removed and reinterred at the Baker Cemetery in Crawford County. I accept that notion.
Okay, there is the mystery. Is she buried here or not? My opinion is that she is. Of course, I don't know. Nobody knows. But some of the things I've seen and heard, I believe she is buried here. I was talking to an old-timer up the road here, and his grandfather, I believe it was his grandfather, said that one night he looked over here and saw a bunch of lights. So he came over here to see what was going on, and he found several men with shovels and lanterns, horses, and a wagon. And he asked them what they were doing, and they said, "This is none of your concern, you need to leave." So he left, and that's the night that we think she was reburied by family members.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of backed up a lot of the claims here too, with scientific evidence. We try to rule out all natural explanations before we come to the determination, location's haunted. So we brought a lot of equipment out here over the years. We've used EMF meters, thermal imaging cameras. We've set up infrared camera systems. I mean, we've been out here night after night trying to collect evidence of paranormal activity out here. One of the strange occurrences that do take place out here are strange electromagnetic field spikes. We've had our tri-field meter just spike out here. We've had EMF meters go to anywhere from 3.2 to 7.2 milligauss for no reason. So we've documented and recorded strange electromagnetic field phenomena out here, balls of light, just everything you can imagine, from strange feelings to people smelling things. I mean, a lot of people will also report the smell of chocolate out here, which is kind of weird because this is another paranormal event that's associated with this cemetery. that's not really related to the Betsy Reed story. But over in that part of the cemetery over here, there's a Heath buried over there, the Heath family. And if you look back into Crawford County history, the Heath bar was actually invented in Robinson, I believe, there. So, you've got some of the Heaths buried here in Baker Cemetery, and people report the smell of chocolate, which is really strange. On one of my haunted tours, this is kind of strange, I had a psychic come up to me. And this psychic, and this has happened on 2 different occasions, 2 different people that claim to be psychic has told me this same story. They said that Elizabeth dances over here, and she likes it when I bring people here on haunted tours, and they say that she dances around over here in the corner.
Here at Baker, over the times that we've been investigating, we'll get one lead and we'll think that, okay, this is the story and this is it. And then I'm a big believer in synchronicity, and I don't think anything's a coincidence. And it just seems odd that when we're looking for something, something pops up that has something to do with what we're looking for. So in the process of investigating this place, there's probably 3 or 4 other places that we need to investigate that's attached to this place. No one really knows. No one documented the story, so it's all hand-me-down stuff. And one person says, well, my family member knows this and said this. None of it's documented, so there's no written proof. Everything is a story. There's no truth that you can actually read, like look it up, cold hard fact, this is what happened. And I think that's part of the mystery of the place. I think that's what draws everybody here.
This is the story of Elizabeth Betsy Reed, whose alleged crime, attempted escape, trial, conviction, execution, and burial are debated to this day. Modern perceptions lead many to look upon the settlers of the 1800s as backwater superstitious hicks. The Reed case wasn't deliberated by the superstitious or the ignorant. Rather, it was judged by the Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, argued by a former Attorney General and a future Illinois governor. The challenges the pioneers faced and overcame on a daily basis would overwhelm the majority of citizens today. Modern misconceptions allow us to dismiss the fantastic in the light of day, while haunting our dreams at night. We leave you with one final mysterious piece of evidence that has been provided by the Crawford County, Illinois ghost hunters. An EVP recording which they believe is a direct answer to the question, Betsy, did you kill your husband?
Got it.